Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you on an episode of Antim. Today, we're very excited to have our friends from Soch Mental Health here, just me and Manit. And obviously, we're talking about mental health with both of them. Just to give you a brief intro on both of them, they're registered nurses who have kind of pivoted their career to focus on mental health and devoted their time and energy on spotlighting mental health for the South Asian community. So, without further ado, I just want to welcome both of you onto the episode, show, whatever you want to call it, and kind of just want to ask you, uh, what does community mean to you? We ask all our guests that, and why did you start Soch?
So hi everybody. Thank you, Puneet, so much for inviting Puneet and myself to this episode of Antim. I think it's so amazing the work that you're doing and having these different conversations. So my name is Jasmeet. This is Puneet. We are best friends. We are registered nurses, and we are the co-founders of Soch Mental Health. So for those that may not know, in Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi, Soch means to think or a thought. So our whole idea is to change our community's thinking or our soch about mental health. And as we, continue on with this conversation, you'll really get an understanding of what community really means to us. But one of the reasons that we started Soch was because of the community. Manit and myself, we've had experience dealing with mental health issues growing up in our own homes, and the community around us didn't really understand what was going on. There's a lot of stigma. Nobody wanted to talk about it, even though people knew that certain things may have been happening within our individual homes. And then when, I became a nurse, was working in the community, you could see that disconnect there as well. So for me, community really means using, our personal lived experience, our professional expertise to bring different members of the community, whether it's the city you're living in, now it's virtual, a global community, bringing individuals together through storytelling, connecting them to one another through that lived human experience, which can sometimes, nowadays, social media is supposed to connect us, but it really starts to divide us. So that is really what community means to me. It's bringing that lived experience, that human element to a story so that we can feel a connection with one another.
Yeah, exactly. And I know you briefly touched there on social media, but that's one of the things I think that Soch has done best is you guys have put everything there on social media. You've made it so accessible for people to get this information about mental health. And I think you don't see that too often. And that's one of the things that stood out to me the most and how I got to know both of you through social media. And then,
Yeah, I think I was gonna add, like with social media, it can be really challenging. When myself and Jasmine started Soch, using social media as a health promotion platform wasn't really part of our schooling and our experience. So I think it is a risk when you kind of go out there and you're trying to do non-traditional things. But I think what we've been successful with is using a non-traditional approach to talking about mental health, especially in our South Asian community, because there's so much stigma. But kind of coming back to community, I think our community thrives when they know someone's struggling and they know that they're suffering, they want to help. I think we're seeing that around the globe, with like circumstances in India, farmers' protests, COVID, Indianapolis, the shooting that happened at the FedEx facility. When we're hearing about individuals struggling, it's like in us to help. And that light kind of, it just kind of goes off, and you want to channel your love, your support to people. So I think in that, looking at community, I think that is the power of social media when you use it to your advantage and to help people rise.
I think you guys are doing a great job at that aspect of bringing community and mental health and just incorporating both together. So just jumping into the next question, I like to always ask people to simplify things, because if you can explain something to a 7-year-old, they will understand it easily. So I want to ask you both, how do you explain mental health to a 7-year-old, I guess, in the easiest way possible?
So I like that you said that the best way is to simplify things. And I think when it comes to mental health, sometimes we think it has to be this serious, complicated conversation, but there are age appropriate ways that we can target different age ranges, right? Whether it's a 7-year-old or a 70-year-old. And I think using a creative manner is something that is really important. So for example, there are so many different books and different movies out there that are really focusing on children's mental health. So that is one way that we can start to explain to children what mental health is, because most of us as adults have a really difficult time grasping what mental health is because we didn't build that foundation when we were children. So even a few weeks ago, or actually last week, we did a children's book reading. It was a book for children ages 4 and over. We did the book reading, which was focused on mental health, and then we did an activity, a gratitude exercise. So that's one way that you can have a conversation with children, like introduce it early. I'm sure, you, Puneet, even like the viewers, you guys have probably seen that or heard of that movie Inside Out, right? So you're using characters, colors, different animations to really show children that mental health is this and it's your emotions. So I think really connecting emotions is one way to show children what mental health is. And another way is to really like help them visualize. So for example, you can let them know that just like we have our heart, which is an organ, and we have to take care of it by exercising, eating healthy, drinking lots of water, we also have our mind, which is here, and our brain, which is an organ. And we also have to do little things every day so that our mind also feels well, and that our brain and our heart and our body is connected. So that way they're also able to make that visual connection of what's mental health, right? Because even as adults, we don't realize what mental health is because we can't physically see it. So I think with kids, it's really about making that physical connection and letting them know that it's okay to talk about your feelings. Like, what does being sad look like? Like, if someone is sad, if someone is happy, what does that mean? What do they look like? And then also allowing parents or caregivers to share with their children that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be happy, it's okay to have different emotions. So I think that open communication is like another way of showing children what mental health is. But I think that that first example I was saying, like that connection between we have our body, which is physical health, but we also have our mind, which is called our mental health, is one good way. But that creative element is really important.
I really like that because the heart and taking care of your body and then thinking about it with your brain and mind, sorry, I should say, it really simplifies it. And that's exactly the answer that I was looking for. Thank you, Jasmeet. The next, I
I
think,
was
sorry,
I was
Maneet?
gonna add, I was gonna add stuff. I think like going back, like I know Jasmine kind of delved into the strategies on how you would explain, but I think the foundational question is more like, when you're talking to a 7-year-old or a 70-year-old, what is mental health? And so mental health, essentially, like I know she touched on parts and elements of it, but it's essentially your humanness, right? I think we forget as human beings, like, we have a spirit, we have emotions, and there's courses things that are happening in our life. We go through different milestones, there's ups and downs. So mental health is your ups as well as your downs, right? And how do you take care of that organ, which is your brain, but that emotional element of making decisions, seeing the world the way you see it in your lens, and how do you regulate that? Because we can learn to see things in positive light even during difficult times. And how do we take care of ourselves to bounce back? So if you were to just explain to a young child, like, what is mental health, it's part of your humanness, it's part of the human element, that spirit inside you. And how do we take care of that, to make it strong and resilient, but also learn to be vulnerable and accept those moments that we think are weak but are really not weak. They actually help us understand us in all our elements. So I think that was kind of the simplifying bit on what is mental health.
And I like that you guys both said that it doesn't matter if it's a 7-year-old or a 70-year-old, the basics of mental health is the same thing, right? And that kind of leads to the next question, because there is a lot of elderly, and especially when we talk about immigrants or ethnic minorities, that just don't know what mental health is, or when it does come up, it's just considered a topic that you're not supposed to talk about, taboo, right? There's a stigma around it. Why do you think there is this stigma around mental health, especially with these ethnic minorities, like I'm mentioning? You guys deal with the South Asian community. And how do we kind of get over that hurdle, that barrier that exists?
I think the issue that we have seen in our community, in our experience, and why we started Soch was there was no way to describe it and organize the thoughts behind it, right? So I know there's a lot of conversation. Oh, there aren't specific words for mental illnesses in Punjabi, but it is talked about. Like, even if you go to like Gurbani, specifically within the Sikh faith, and I'm sure, like, I'm kind of speaking from Sikhism because that's the religious faith that I follow, but I'm sure in other faiths, like, you talk about different elements of struggle and, going through trials and tribulations in your life and what that might look like. So I think the reason there's such a disconnect is no one in terms of mainstream like mental health services or initiatives has really driven conversation from that cultural perspective and given people the tools and the organization to make sense of what they're going through. So if I don't know to recognize something and I don't know how to talk about it, I'm going to be more resistant to it, because that's just how we feel with, when there's an unknown or there's a fear of things. And that's a prime example of COVID right now. When fear is high and things are unknown, we make rash decisions. We're not able to trust information that's coming at us. People are not taking the time to explain things to us in a way that we grasp it. And I think that's essentially what the struggle is, especially here, I would say in Canada, right? Like, we have a lot of our immigrant families, they've settled here, but a lot of their soch and thinking has not changed because no one's really spent the time to strengthen their soch. And I think that's kind of the reason why we picked the name Soch for the work that we're doing, because to a 7-year-old and a 70-year-old who speaks Punjabi, Hindi, or Urdu, you can say, we're talking about your soch, we're talking about your thinking, and there's elements of your thinking that we can improve and work on. So there's a lot of stigma. I think when we talk about stigma, there's twofold stigma, right? Like, there's self-stigma, there's stigma that I put on myself because I have expectations of myself, which I probably got from watching those around me, right? So then there's that public stigma of, you should have it all figured out. You should be performing at a certain pace in school. At a certain age, you should be married. And then at a certain age, you should have kids and a certain income and a house and all these checks and balances. So we don't really stop to, I think, have these meaningful conversations. And I think it just really boils down to stigma. And so with the work that we're doing, particularly with the different generations, is kind of having a meaningful conversation to explore, what is their understanding of their soch and mental health, because they have gone through a lot, right? We look at our elders, they have endured so much. And even our parents, like, coming to a foreign country, establishing their roots, helping us, rise. And even myself and Jasmine being where we are today, we wouldn't have this privilege to do this episode if it wasn't for the risks that our parents took, right? So they do have coping skills, they have resiliency, but it hasn't been organized in a way to understand it. So I think the biggest gap in ethnic minorities is that cultural and linguistic piece, which we're trying to fill within the South Asian community, specifically the Punjabi community, because that's where we wanted to start. That's a language that we know, but definitely want to dive into other subgroups and talking about mental health in other languages, because language is key, culture is key. I think that goes a long way.
And just me, anything you want to add?
No, I think Vineet summed it up beautifully.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I think what you guys do and how you do it in Punjabi and these other languages that you offer, and I think that essentially is the best way to get over all that hurdle. Because if people can't understand what you're saying, there's these conversations we're having in English, but that 70-year-old immigrant might not understand this conversation. So I think it's very important what you guys are doing in Punjabi. And kind of also another thing that you guys do is you talk about your own families, right? And that is another huge thing to get over the hurdle, because everyone's so private about their own problems, their own concerns. And I think you two, being the mental health experts, are just putting your stuff out there. It allows for people to trust you even more and be like, hey, if they're sharing these personal stories and how it affected them, and the troubles they've had and how they're overcoming it, and we're all people, I think it helps huge. I can just first recall back to when we met in the early days, and you guys used to always, after a meeting, just have a, but how are you doing? Yeah, I remember you guys always used to ask that, and it still, resonates with me. And, you know, being in the role that I was, in the age that I was, there was a lot of pressure, running a family business, uh, dealing with funerals. There was just so much going on. And I remember you guys referred me to a friend of yours so I could go to speak to. So I think it's like even me sharing now my experience and how that helped me. And it just gets your thoughts, in check, and, in certain things. It helps huge. And I think that would help other people to see, hey, there is things out there, there's resources out there. Talk to people and you can get help, right? And we're all humans, like you said, Manit, earlier. Everyone has the ups and downs, and I think that's part of life, and understanding that you will have these, and it's just not smooth sailing for everybody.
Yeah, and even because like that's like what Minnie had mentioned, that that humanness, and even what I was talking about, like that storytelling piece, right? It kind of goes back to what Minnie was saying, like that self stigma and that public stigma. Because in ethnic minorities, particularly the South Asian community, Punjabi community, we don't openly talk about these things. Like Minnie said, it's like that circle, right? You don't talk about it, the stigma gets worse. The stigma is there, you don't talk about it. So that's why we really try to be open about our own challenges, not just to be like, this is what we've gone through, but it's like, okay, this is what we went through, but this is how we were able to help ourselves. These are the strategies that we used. And that way it's a way to get that conversation started, so people also know that they're not alone, because that's a part of stigma as well, right? Because you don't talk about it, you think you're the only one going through this situation, so then you don't want to share, and then you don't want to access services. But like even you opening up, especially as a South Asian male, I think that's really huge, and we definitely need a lot more of these conversations, not just within our own generation, but even like I said, age appropriate ways to have these discussions. Because if people can hear other people's stories, it gives them hope and resilience that, okay, I'm not the only one going through this, maybe I can also share. And then that ties back into the first question of community, right? If we're able to make that connection through our shared experiences and support one another, that's exactly what we're trying to do here with Soch, what you're trying to do, with your family business and whatnot. So it all ties back together, humanness and mental health.
Exactly. And I think when you look from the outside in, sometimes you see, I'm wearing a suit, family has a business, things look good, and they are, but there's always, like I said, those hurdles, right? So just looking back at last month with the 2-week closure, there's a lot of things that happen in a day-to-day situation, and it's just about how you're able to deal with them. And I think knowing how much I know about mental health now definitely is a game changer. You know what I mean? With just even thinking back to that suspension and all the emotions that I went through, from the highs, and being able to get myself back in check, from meditating to gratitude. And I know we're going to get into some of this stuff later, so I'm not going to reveal all the secrets, but
Yeah.
it's been quite game changing from the time that I've met you and the stuff that I've learned now. Yeah. And
Yeah,
kind of gonna,
that's awesome that you shared that. I think even what you're sharing, right? Like with your personal experience with the suspension, I think we never know what someone's narrative or what's happening behind the scenes. So it's always important to come from a lens of compassion and empathy and be curious as well. I think that's one of the things that stuck to me in some of my mental health training, is that when you have clients or families that you're working with that are extremely difficult, be curious as to what's happening. What are the factors? And it may not be something that's happening right now, right? It could be something that they went through in their past. Like there's a lot of conversation now about intergenerational trauma and how trauma is passed on through genetics. So something, our grandparents went through is going to predispose us to certain mental health risks and factors. So just to look at people and be curious and be compassionate. And you never know. And that's the thing with mental health, right? I can't see what's happening inside each of you. I can't even see what's happening inside myself, right? Like I need to make time to carve out and identify that and gain those skills. So compassion and empathy are huge and very much needed, especially during a time and place where things are a race, right? Like, I think if anything, one good thing from COVID, it's made us slow down and really reflect on the connections and relationships that matter. And we crave that now. We want to have those meaningful engagements and conversations with people that we care about. And it's really important to have that foundation.
Yeah. And that's actually the next topic that we're getting into. It's COVID, because there's definitely been that downtime where people have gotten some time to take for themselves, but there's the opposite side of it as well. And I hear this a lot these days. People are tired, people are fatigued, and you hear like these complaints about COVID restrictions and how it's impacting their life. And there's a lot of negative thought behind it. What would you comment on that about the COVID fatigue? What are some habits, routines that people can implement to sort of get them through this, hopefully, last phase of COVID?
So definitely there's a lot of strategies that we can provide, and you, Puneet, were even mentioning some of them, right? Like since meeting us and learning more about mental health, you've learned a lot. And I think that's one element as well, right? Like continuous learning. And like Puneet previously just mentioned, having that time for yourself. Right. So with us, like whenever we talk about COVID fatigue, we really talk about like, what's your routine, right? So is it just like now everyone's working from home? Are you literally waking up 5 minutes before you have to go to work or to school and rolling over and turning on your laptop? But still maintaining that healthy routine, right? So with that, like we really encourage individuals to have some sort of routine that they had pre-pandemic. So waking up at a certain time, having a morning routine, whether it's some sort of meditative practice or journaling or just, a few like hours without using your phone, and then having set times for work or school, getting those breaks in, right? So instead of, like I said, try to get out of your bed, don't eat at your desk, wherever that might be. Set those breaks up for yourself and really have a routine, because humans literally thrive off of routines. We need that schedule, but then also allowing flexibility within that routine, right? So that's where those breaks come in. That's where those activities for yourself or with your family comes in. Because like you said, there's so many restrictions. We're really limited as to ways that we can have fun and maintain our mental well-being. And now that the weather is getting warmer, try to get outside more, incorporate, your family, the individuals you're living with, or even meeting individuals for walks, but based on the restrictions that are allowed. And even setting up a workspace. That kind of goes back to the first thing I was talking about with the routine. Is sometimes a lot of individuals have spoken to us about that blur with their boundaries. Right now, you're not physically going into the office, you're staying at home. So having those discussions with your family as well, that this designated area is my workspace. Between these hours, I'm working. So I'm not going to be able to do household chores. And even though it's been a year and a half, and sometimes we feel that our family should know these things, they're also struggling because now we are in their environment, which was their home environment, but now everyone kind of needs to compromise and, have that open communication. And also allowing yourself to be sad and be angry and all of those, unpleasant emotions, because online you're constantly seeing things like, this is how the pandemic is wonderful. I was able to do all of these things, like check off all these goals. You should be grateful that, you're living in this country and we have vaccines and we have this. But then that's also positive. Sorry, that's like positive toxicity. We also need to be able to, like I said, go back to that human experience and be like, this is really terrible. It's been several months and it doesn't seem to be getting any better in these areas. So I am going to sit here and be sad or be angry and be irritable. And then that kind of goes back to that reflective piece, right? Like being with yourself and allowing yourself to feel these emotions and these thoughts in a healthy manner.
Anything else?
I think with routine and everything, like one thing I recognize in myself and those around me is that we need novelty, right? I think it's really important. Things get very mundane. Like every day you have a routine and you're doing amazing with your routine, but sometimes you need to throw that off. And I think that's when you get like a fresh perspective. So, doing something that's outside of your box, like, yes, there are COVID restrictions, but is there some family or friends that are vulnerable or someone you haven't seen in a while that you can do a drive by, like do something kind for them, like, you drop off something or, just to drive by and say hello, like you're allowed to do that safely, right? And not to forget that human element that we've been talking about, like, you can be doing your routine and all of that, but doing something that is outside the box, that's out of your norm, and really throwing your schedule off, because I think that's what helps you kind of keep yourself anchored and keep things exciting. I think as human beings, we always want to explore. We love relationships and having new experiences. So it's really important to find ways to have new experiences and talk to people around you, see what they're doing, to get some of those ideas.
I like both those answers because you're talking about being spontaneous and doing something different, which is always a refresher, part of your day-to-day routine. And just me, what you said is schedules are huge, right? For myself, same thing. The first wave of the pandemic, I don't think anyone really knew how to cope with it. We were all just so new to it. And my schedule routine, yeah, work was there, but other than that, I just forgot the simple things to do just because everyone's all over the place. So like the breathing or the working out, you neglect some of those things. Whereas this time around, we have more information. Like you said, you're speaking to friends and peers, and you just understand that, okay, you can get through this. This is your schedule. This is what makes you feel good. This is work, but I need this time for this, right? And I think that's huge. And those are great answers. The next question is a little different, but it's kind of why I wanted to do this segment. You guys being the mental health people, I want to ask you, we see quite a few times people dying from, alcohol abuse related deaths or overdoses, suicides, these kind of things. I understand that there's greater mental health implications behind these things. So it's a twofold question. What are these implications, and is there a solution to sort of talk about these more?
So I guess I'll start with the substance use aspect, because I know you did mention like suicide as well. So when it comes to substance use, I think generally it is a very stigmatized topic, not a lot of public knowledge about really the core of substances, why people use them. And then that's an additional layer in the South Asian community as well. So for me personally, my research, so my master's research is focused on the perceptions of alcohol use and the impact of drinking on Punjabi families. So that clinical perspective, that researchers' knowledge is really there. But then also I have that personal experience where my dad has struggled with a drinking problem, right? So both of those perspectives really coming together to kind of, delve into what I'm about to say. So when it comes to substance use, particularly drinking in the South Asian community, I think there's such a myth. There's so many different layers that we don't really understand. And what I really want the viewers to understand is that not all substances are going to make you become addicted to it, right? It's really trying to understand, why is this person using this substance? Say we're talking about drinking. So it's like, what is the substance? It's not what the substance does to you, it's what it does for you. And I know that can be a little tricky to understand, but for example, if alcohol was as addictive as we may think it is, then anyone that drinks would be addicted the first time. But that's not the case, right? Like, we really have to understand, if someone is having a difficulty with a substance, why might they be doing this, right? And as a family member, that can be really challenging because you're in that situation. You might be living with this person, like emotions are involved, there's so many different layers. But whenever it comes to any type of substance use, there is a reason why this person is using it. And a lot of it has to do with mental health, right? Maybe they're trying to escape a situation. Maybe there's a certain void that they're trying to fill. And it can be difficult to have those conversations with families. So I'm not saying that the family needs to be the counselor and, ask this person, why are you doing this? That's not the role of the family. But just as viewers, just to even have that curiosity, like Maneet was saying earlier, be curious as to why someone might be behaving in a certain way. Why might they be using these substances? When did this start? And because, we're talking to you and with the funeral business and grief, that's one aspect that we can even consider, right? Like if someone is going through grief, a lot of times people do turn to substances to deal with the unpleasant emotions that they don't want to deal with. And that's something that I've experienced as well, right? Like with my dad, my grandfather and my aunt passed away within a month of one another. And that's really when we noticed his drinking escalated, because 2 deaths in 1 month is really challenging. And for someone that was already drinking, the alcohol wasn't the problem, it was the solution to that situation that they were facing. And even with the pandemic, a lot of newspaper articles are coming out that people are using more substances, maybe because they're bored, there's nothing to do. Boredom is a reason people use substances. It could be because they're having difficulty coping with everything that's going on, and using that substance, to the family it might seem like it's a problem, but to the person that's using that substance, it's their solution to whatever problem they might be having. So it's a very complicated, topic, addictions, grief, the pandemic, but those are the 2 main points that I really wanted our viewers to really hone in on, is that be curious, because it's not what the substance does to you, but it's what it does for you. And when it comes to drinking in the South Asian community, oftentimes Punjabi community particularly, we say that drinking is the problem. If this person stops drinking, then everything will be fine. But it's not a problem for the person, it's their solution.
I like that answer. So you would say that they're using it just as a coping mechanism, basically, for their other issues.
Definitely, it's an unhealthy coping mechanism, right? Because we have healthy coping strategies and unhealthy,
Yeah.
and oftentimes substance use becomes an unhealthy way of dealing with those unpleasant emotions and thoughts that we don't want to deal with, or don't have the capacity, the knowledge, or the tools to even understand.
And I know, just we could spend a lot of time on this topic, obviously, because you said there's a lot to it. But just one thing that I want to definitely ask for the viewers is, some families, situations, it might be hard, like you said, for them to bring this up, or the situation might be so bad. What would you recommend? What are the resources there for this, or help? Like if say your father doesn't even want to acknowledge the help, or it's gone beyond a point where, clearly this kind of talk is not going to work. What is the solution, or what are the steps there?
So like I was even saying before, the family cannot be the counselor, right? It is not the role of the family to take on the burden of this other individual to try to fix them. However, that is something that happens very often, not just in South Asian communities, but across the board when it comes to dealing with addictions. Because obviously you're seeing this person suffer, you don't want them to, you're suffering, you just want to fix them. So addictions is one of the #1 inquiries that Soch actually gets. And typically it's the family members that are emailing us. Like you said, just about those topics, so-and-so in my family has an issue with drinking or this substance, how do I get them to stop? So my first question to them is always, well, what are you doing to help yourself? Right? Because when we are dealing with someone that has a substance use issue, it can become really toxic and can consume all the individuals that are not just living with them, but even their colleagues, your peers. You don't necessarily have to be living under the same household to be severely impacted. So really, the first thing is reflecting on what are you doing to help yourself? Because if you're emailing someone or trying to ask for resources for the person that is using the substance, that definitely means that you are impacted, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be asking for support. So I always try to turn it around on the person asking for support to reflect on what are you doing to support yourself, and then getting support for yourself first. Because like you said, not everybody is going to be willing to acknowledge that they have an issue. That's typical. That happens with a lot of individuals that use substances. And the metaphor that I typically use, and it's so true, is that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. You can try everything that you know, A to Z, take them here, take them there, get them counseling, do this, do that. But unless they're really willing to acknowledge that they have a substance use problem, they want to get the support, they're ready, willing, and able to seek that support, all of your efforts aren't really going to be helpful, because it's really up to that person. So you can't change the person necessarily, but you can change your response to them and your response to that situation. So those are like two, I know it's not exactly the resources you were asking for, but
That
I think
explains
those
it,
are
yeah.
important things. But definitely there are resources in the community, right? Like Soch is one of them. We've done addictions groups in Punjabi before. There's other resources in the community that individuals can access either for themselves or for their loved ones, depending on what that substance use might look like. There are some, culturally and linguistically appropriate services available as well. It really just depends on the need of the individual.
Oh, that does help, Jasmeet. Thank you. And just kind of going to the next topic now is the actual grief component, right? Obviously, us at the funeral home, we see that a lot, right? And when I initially reached out to both of you, it was about grief counseling and grief seminars, because I told you that we help families from the time of the death till the funeral. And obviously there's a little bit afterwards, but we felt like we weren't doing enough for the grief, or what were these family members feeling afterwards, right? And just these tragic situations, or any situation, because there's grief in any death, right? I wanted to provide support through Soch. So just kind of want to touch on that. What suggestions would you give to families who have lost a loved one during COVID? With all the restrictions, the funerals weren't the same way. What are some strategies you would give to cope with their grief?
So I think this is very timely of you asking this, Pani, because like I've mentioned on the Soch platform, one of our family members, my mama G, passed away last week from COVID. So I think just being in the third wave, having a number of family members impacted with COVID, hospitalized with COVID, and now experiencing a loss in the family, it is so excruciating and so difficult to navigate these situations. And I obviously didn't grasp how difficult it is. And I don't think anyone does until you go through the motions yourself. So we've had two recent losses in the family. And I think speaking from those, my sister is also in healthcare. So her and I just have been talking like how important it is to still find a way to connect. And I think that's where some of us in the younger generation have come up with ways to help our family navigate and really sort out their feelings, the process of absorbs and grieving together. So some of the things that we've been doing as a family is doing Zoom calls with our larger family, which, our parents have never been a part of. Although we've been in touch, with cousins and friends on Zoom doing like birthday celebrations, we've made it a point, like not even at the point where the family member passed, when they were unwell at the hospital, we were checking in and creating a space. Like that's what we were kind of looking for, is creating a space for our elders to connect. And everyone, not a single person missed the opportunity, right? Like I was like, oh, it's a weekday evening. Are they going to jump on? Someone from the household jumped on Zoom and we were there. Like, we've had several Zoom sessions as a family where people have stayed on for 2 to 3 hours, even just connecting and talking and feeling really good. Like there were times where my mama G was unwell and it was very serious conversation, but in Afsos and in grieving, you have reminiscing, sharing stories. So there were times that we had a Zoom session where people are sharing their memories and stories and laughing. But of course, like, you know, with grief and with him passing and with the funeral just kind of around the corner, we've been trying to find a creative way to still check in on family. So going and doing a drive-by, still dropping off food and dropping off things to like my Mama G's family, checking in on other family members, doing a drive-by, like dropping stuff off. Like, I understand there's a stay-at-home order, but this is beyond essential to check in on your family and also to do it safely. So do follow guidelines. Make sure, you know, you're not gathering inside and you're wearing a mask, and you're, you know, making sure we've been telling our family, if you do a drive-by, you're dropping something off, make sure you're not sick, right? You're not feeling unwell. You haven't been in contact with anyone. So I think that's been one like a big, huge element of us grieving and navigating grief, and also to maintain that after the funeral. I think what our families and what everyone's really good at is being there up until the funeral. And after that point, even personally, after when I lost my dad, it was those individuals that also checked in on me after the fact, a month later, 2 months later. Like, grief sticks around, right? But I know you guys, like with you at the funeral home, like you have created such a phenomenal platform where people can view the service as well as, you know, share memories and pictures and really celebrate life. Like, you know, it is COVID, it's a pandemic, loss is loss. But like with my personal experience of losing my dad, it was very sudden, very unexpected, but we still found a way to celebrate his life. And I think that is pivotal in grief and loss. And yes, it can be very hard. Maybe it's more challenging for family members that are very immediate and close to the individual that passed. So other people can take that lead and that role. But I think overall, with the grief work that we've done through, like with Brampton, in collaboration with Brampton Crematorium for the community, what people find healing in with grief is finding a purpose and to channel your pain, because grief is love, and you still want to find a way to express the love for the person you lost towards something. So I think that is pivotal in terms of coping with your grief. But of course, if there is anyone having a challenging time, not knowing how to navigate, please reach out to us at Soch. And we are, of course, looking to bring back the grief support groups like in the near future for our community, because it is very much needed.
Exactly. So a couple of things really stand out to me. There is that upsos on the Zoom, because even I wouldn't have thought of that. And it's great just to let other families know who are going to be watching your channel, hey, you can do this, right? And it's definitely a lot safer than trying to sneak into somebody's house. So I really like that idea. And the second part, like you were saying, about the funerals, because you only essentially have one chance. Yes, you can do something later on, but that's not really big in our community. You know, there's other communities that do memorial services later on. But like you said, we have the death happens and we do a very quick funeral. So right now with COVID, you still want to celebrate that person's life. It's still such a huge thing of such importance, right? And like you were saying, with the live streaming or now with the outdoor funerals, we're trying whatever we can to still allow a level of normal, right? Just let people come and pay respects. And I've noticed that in the drive-through visitations, when the family members are just acknowledging those people, they probably haven't seen these people in so long, but they know, hey, this person drove here to pay respects to our loved one, and they acknowledge them. You just feel that, you know, sense of togetherness, and it's great, right? So, and just jumping on the last thing you were saying about the grief seminars, that's something that, you know, we started with you guys at Soch, and it's definitely something that we want to have on an ongoing basis, because right now for our community, they might not understand what grief seminars are, but you see a lot of the times these deaths that, you know, the family's going to have trouble with their grief, like, you know, a sudden death, a parent or a spouse or a young child. I did a funeral this previous weekend for a young child, and I had a hard time this whole weekend just, you know, trying to do that funeral. And I saw the siblings of that child, like they don't even know yet like what they were experiencing, like their brothers, you know, there. And I just think like later on, what are the implications of this going to be like to those children and to those parents? So definitely do want those ongoing, and we definitely want the community to spread the awareness about that. Hey, there is this resource. There is going to be these seminars. We will both, provide more information on our platforms about that. But on my end, I'm just very thankful that you guys gave us this time. This was a topic that we wanted to do for a long time, and I just want to thank both of you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
just
so much, Panit.
thank you, Jasmine. And just before that, like, I know a lot of people know about you guys on Instagram, but where can they follow you? How can they reach out for help? What is the email to get more help at?
So you can visit our website, which is sochmentalhealth.com, SOCH, sochmentalhealth.com. And we have a lot of events that are free for the community. We do them in English and as well as in Punjabi. Even on our website, we have different yoga and meditation videos in Punjabi that you can watch with your families. So really targeting that generational approach, right? And getting that conversation started in your home by watching this video. We even have 10 short films in English and Punjabi that you can watch with your family on the mental health challenges of South Asian students. So different ways that you can really plug into the community to get that conversation started. We're also on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you have any specific concerns or questions, you can email us at info@sochmentalhealth.com.